The simplest definition of design that I offer is 3 words: thoughtfully improving lives. I'm Dan, and I'm a designer. It's really, how do you transform culture, and how can design be a force for good? Designers and artists are both creative, but designers are servants. Designers should be humble. Designers should be thinking about how to make this world better. The success of a designer comes from making the lives of people that touch and use the products and services and experiences that you create to make their lives better. I feel that modern design is actually the heart and soul of modern business. Delighting and serving and uplifting the lives of the people who you design for. It's not just altruism. When you do that well, incredible profits also come. It's not your designers that suck. It's your understanding of design that sucks as a business that needs to change. The real question is, can you continue to afford the consequences of your current mediocre design? There's nothing holding you back from taking the next step for innovating as a company, and that step is getting better at design. I think we're put on this planet to make it a better experience, a better place, and just don't hold back. Life is precious. It's too short. Just jump in, go for it. Whether you're a designer, a technologist, an innovator, whatever you are, take the next step. I'm Dan, and I'm a designer. I didn't always think I'd be a designer because I studied international relations. I wanted to go into global development. And back in the 90s, I discovered this thing called HTML, which was super cool. And I discovered macromedia, lingo scripting, and just kind of a whole new world of digital tools was emerging. So I ended up getting a degree in communications and multimedia design. And because those skills were really needed in my 20s, before I even graduated from university, I was already a designer. So I started in software, I started in the web, 7 years on the agency side. And then ultimately, I decided to go to Microsoft. That was 20 years ago. And at Microsoft, I did all kinds of stuff, from redesign of Hotmail to a redesign of Mac Office. So we launched a version of Excel. So really getting deep into, one of the most complicated bits of software in the business side. And then we launched the first version of Surface when it was a table. And I was in charge of the interaction design, but because we owned the hardware, I got really excited about physical, digital, and ultimately I went to Motorola to design smartphones and the experiences there. So, and in the last 6 years, I've been out of the bubble of Silicon Valley, which was beautiful for the decade that I was there. And I've been designing as a chief design officer in places like banks and healthcare companies. So it's really not software or hardware. It's really, how do you transform culture, and how can design be a force for good? The simplest definition of design that I offer is 3 words: thoughtfully improving lives. And there's a lot of terms in design. There's information architecture and UX design, product design, and industrial designer and architects. I mean, there's all kinds of specific names around designers in different craft areas. But I think about the human-centered aspect of design. And in this definition of thoughtfully improving lives, the success of a designer comes from making the lives of people that touch and use the products and services and experiences that you create to make their lives better. And it's very different from how you would think of an artist. An artist can work with the freedom of whatever self-expression they want. And designers and artists are both creative, but designers are servants. Designers should be humble. Designers should be thinking about how to make this world better. And you might say, well, Dan, why is that important in the world of business? Isn't the world of business all about numbers and revenue? And, I remember I was working actually at Walmart, the Fortune 1, the world's largest business. And there was the head of our foundation gave a talk about Walmart and about business. And she made this definition of business, which was the purpose of business is to serve society. And I'd never heard that definition before. And it's a little bit it's a bit strange, isn't it? But when you really think about it, in the short term, businesses make all kinds of decisions this quarter about profit, loss, etc. But over the long term, if a business doesn't provide a valuable service or good or need that somebody has, they go out of business. And so when you connect the idea of human-centered design, thoughtfully improving lives, with this idea that the heart and soul of business is serving society in some way, I feel that modern design is actually the heart and soul of modern business. And those two things are super connected. There's three P's that have emerged in modern business conversation. So people also talk about the planet. So there's a lot of companies now have chief sustainability officers because companies have responsibility to broaden beyond just their clients and customers to think about their responsibility to the world. And then they also think about people. And people is, well, how does, for example, United Health Group, where I was chief design officer for the last 2 years, clearly in the US healthcare system, there's a lot of differences in treatment and care and outcomes depending on your race, your education, where you live, like, so we have a chief diversity officer that's helping to think about that. So people, planet, and not just profits, but prosperity. I think modern companies are already talking about this. And I feel like delighting and serving and uplifting the lives of the people who you design for, it's not just altruism. When you do that well, incredible profits also come. To me, innovation lies at the heart of three factors. There's business factors, which is all about viability. Is the business model work? Can you run the business? All of that. And then there's technical factors of feasibility. Like, is this possible? Does the technology exist? Hardware, software, services, whatever. And then the third area is you often forgot, but it's super important. These are human factors of desirability. And that is, does anyone need this? Does anyone want this? And if you can look at any failed business and you can see that there's a deficit in one of those three things, right? Like the Concorde supersonic flight. Like, it's possible, it's feasible, so technical factors are good, right? People want it. They had lots of bookings. It wasn't viable as a business. It was just too expensive to run in the margins of that business. So the thing about Silicon Valley is they always start with technology. I've lived Palo Alto a decade. There's 5,000 homes in Palo Alto. That's where Mark Zuckerberg lives. That's where the Page family. That's where the Jobs. I mean, all the CEOs of the top tech companies are there. My kids were friends with their kids. Like, you hear the conversation. And what Silicon Valley is excited about is shiny tech objects. Like, oh, drones, AI, autonomous cars. What can we do with this tech, right? And I love that excitement. That's part of the passion of Silicon Valley, is all of that optimistic tech enthusiasm. But I so often feel like tech only forgets about, well, can we actually run a business out of this? Or does anyone really need that right now? And so I feel like business always starts with, viable factors of innovation. And Silicon Valley, I just felt like I was in one bubble too much. So when I left and I got to Lloyd's Banking Group, this 250 plus year old British bank, very good at business factors of innovation, modernizing in tech. They were spending £3 billion over 3 years from 2018 to, when I left in 2021, to modernize, to bring in some of that Silicon Valley energy. So they didn't actually hire me primarily for my design. I think there's probably this, well, he kind of knows tech in Silicon Valley. Let's make sure that we get his guidance as we modernize. But the human factors of innovation are just as important, if not more so. And you can see this in companies like Apple. Apple on the surface does all the same kind of stuff that any other big computing company like Dell or anybody else will do. But they're the first $1 trillion company. They're one of the most respected and admired companies from a business perspective. And what's different about them? Well, Steve Jobs put Johnny Ive reporting to the CEO and became the first chief design officer. And he basically said design, simplicity, the humanity and creativity that comes from design is just as important as technology and business. And you can see with Airbnb. Brian Chesky, the only CEO of the Fortune 500 who has a design background. Look at how that company has navigated some of the most treacherous, COVID situations and emerged with more profit per dollar invested than Apple or Google. That's from a design leader, right? So these three things are all interconnected, and I think the world is still just trying to figure it out, because 53 out of the top 1,000, Fortune 1,000 have a chief design advisor or executive. Most of them don't. And I think in the future, all of them will, as they wake up to the power of design. I grew up in suburban Connecticut, in New England. And I, had a friend when I was like a preteen who knew some 90s hip hop dance moves. And he taught me this move called the Roger Rabbit. And it took like 3 weeks for my, white kid, uncoordinated body to even get it. But I remember feeling so awkward and uncomfortable, but then so joyous when I finally got that rhythm. And so, fast forward, I read a few years ago a book by the Kelly brothers. They're some of the co-founders of IDEO, the world's most respected innovation firm. They wrote several books, but the most recent book was Creative Confidence, which is all about how do we as humans reclaim our innate creativity, which we all have, but somehow in our middle school years, we start to fear the judgment of our peers. And in essence, the whole idea of creative confidence is get out of your comfort zone. Consciously step out of your comfort zone at work, at home, in your habits, in your activities, and then become comfortable with feeling uncomfortable and wrestling with that. Because if creativity is simply the optimism and the hope that the future could be different. And in order to create that future, you have to get out of your comfort zone. So when I was at Lloyd's, we were doing this training program for all the design directors. And we had 40 folks across the team in 2 days. And I was doing a session on creative confidence. And so when everyone else did like lectures or little hands-on activities, and I was like, okay, it's creative confidence time. And for my class, I was like, all right, everybody stand up. And this guy walks in a hoodie and sweatpants. And Sean Paul comes in. He's a choreographer at Pineapple Dance Studios in London. I said, hey, Sean Paul, can you, for an hour, teach my design leaders how to do 90s hip hop dance moves? And he's like, what the heck? Why would I do that? I was like, well, when I was a teenager, this was like empowering for me. And I know this is really awkward, but it's going to be a lesson in creative confidence. So he did. And you can imagine a bunch of banking executives, at first they're like, oh my God, what is going on? Like, really, do I have to do this? And you're so conscious of what other people think about you. But by the middle of that class, towards the end, people had just dropped their fears. There were multiple rounds of performances of the group split in half. We did a little choreography, and it was it was brilliant. It was so powerful to emotionally get into that. I love AI. The conversation about AI has really peaked over the last year or so. I think mostly fueled by ChatGPT and large language models, and it just seems like so incredible and magical to have this interface, this design interface of just being able to talk to this future AI. But the reality is that designers in tech have been wrestling with questions at the core of AI for a very long time. So like when I was 20 years ago at Microsoft, and we were redesigning Hotmail and redesigning MSN chat, we noticed that these chatbots, which weren't humans, people knew they weren't humans, but they were getting a lot of traffic. And we were wrestling with these ethical questions early on about, well, are we facilitating a waste of time? Because people are having conversations with non-real entities with AI. And I remember we were like, actually, well, it's kind of cool, but how do you build ethics into it? And what happens if someone starts, verbally abusing a chatbot? And like, what about politeness? There are all these questions. And then, fast forward, 15 years at Google, I launched Hey Google, which was the first virtual private assistant where technology is meant to really support us in humanly understandable and simple ways. Because at its heart and soul, AI is about how can technology and computing be more human-like in its responses and its capabilities. And I get really excited about a future of AI because I'm an optimist. I want us as human beings to spend our precious time on this planet for doing extraordinary things, not the repetitive, ordinary things. I'm happy for machines to take over some of that stuff. I know there's a lot of transition for work, etc., but it's a fascinating time. There's been so many titles that I've taken on in the last couple of years that I never thought I'd have. First was banker. Like being a banker is a bit of a different kind of title, but I've worked in banking now for, 7 years or 5 years, and Capital One and at Lloyd's. And then also I'm now an author. And so basically, I wrote this book. It's called Uplifting Design, and it's 12 chapters, 218 pages, that essentially distill the last 25 years of my design practice into a book. And I did it because I decided after 20 years of working for one company at a time that I wanted to accelerate my innovation. I wanted to work with more companies. I wanted to 10x my impact. And so now I'm a chief design advisor at any given time, working for 3 to 5 companies and trying to accelerate my impact. And also the book, I'm hoping that anyone, not just designers, but business leaders who want to elevate the practice of design, that this will be accessible to them. And this book is where I talk about the definition of design we talked about. And every one of the 12 chapters starts with a principle. So there are 12 principles of design. And, Dieter Rams is famous for his 10 principles of design. And this is not trying to compete with that. I mean, I would never try to compete with Dieter Rams. He's just so inspiring, and his work is foundational. But these principles, to me, describe an emerging modern space of design that is more connected with business, that is more thoughtful of the environment, that is more understanding of not just hardware or software and services, but experiences, which are all of those. And the book was proofread by my mom. She caught 120 errors. We stayed up till midnight before the deadline to correct them. Someone just sent me an email now that, actually, when you talk about Ikigai with Max, you're using your instead of you are. And so I just fixed another typo. So this is a love gift to the next generation of leaders who wants to bring more design into their places, not from a polished author. I really get excited about bringing my light to these places that are darker and need it. But one of the observations there was we saw what was happening at Apple while we're at Microsoft. Apple would always kick our butts in beautifully integrated hardware and software. And we knew some of the designers at Apple. We went to the same design schools. And we started feeling a little bit imposter syndrome or a little victim mentality, that it's our fault, that we're not good enough. And when we really looked at this closely, we said, you know what? We're the same. You take a designer who has the same training as another designer, you put one in a culture like Apple, one in a culture like Microsoft, they're going to be able to accomplish different things. It's not because they are better than each other. It's because the culture understands, prioritizes, brings in, and understands design in a more powerful way. So really, uplifting design is to help companies that are more in that Microsoft space who don't really get design to uplift design, to elevate design, because it's not your designers that suck, it's your understanding of design that sucks as a business that needs to change. Do not hesitate or wait to begin the process of uplifting design in your organization or in your team. Whether you're a startup with just a couple of folks, or whether you're a large organization or anywhere in between, we can get better at the practice of design. And what that means is just having more empathy, more creative confidence, more humanity in our workplaces. The last thought I would just leave you with is that with that definition that design is thoughtfully improving lives, I mean, the broader definition of design is a generic one. It's like anytime you make something, you're designing. It's anytime you create something. So if you're a business or a team, or, or an organization that is making something, whether it's communication, product, hardware, software, you are designing already. The question is not, can you afford good design? That's what most people say. I can't be like Apple. I have to hire extra designers. I don't really know how that works. The real question is, can you continue to afford the consequences of your current mediocre design? Because if you think about the level of frustration that we all feel when we interface with apps or spaces or products that aren't thoughtful about how we use them, it creates frustration, it creates disloyalty, it creates, all of this momentum to go somewhere else, to work with some other company. So I would just say there's nothing holding you back from taking the next step for innovating as a company, and that step is getting better at design. And now that you know that this book exists, there's ideas, there's 12 methods, 12 case studies, 12 principles, that there's no excuse. Just get started. I think we're put on this planet to make it a better experience, a better place, and just don't hold back. Life is precious. It's too short. Just jump in, go for it. Whether you're a designer, a technologist, an innovator, whatever you are, take the next step. And if you don't know what to do, YouTube how to do the Running Man properly. And some 90s hip hop is always a cure for getting you in the right kind of creative confidence space.